with the presentation or or my audio, please let us know in the chat window so that we can fix it right away. Okay, perfect. So as I said, my name is Unni, and I take care of the business development for Zoho Expense. So today I'll be covering a couple of generic topics on the industry, that is the expense management industry, and how good is the opportunity for business in this domain. So before we get into the session, so let me remind you. So there is a contest which is going on. So you can tweet with hashtag Zoho Inspire on Twitter and LinkedIn. And the top 3 posts every day will win Zoho goodies, or you will get a credits or partner credits of $50. So everyone, please feel free to post something with a hashtag Zoho Inspire. Today's session would be done, or would be so we three will be involved in today's session. So Ramesh, who takes care of the partner engagement, and Fayaz, who takes care of the pre-sales for Zoho Expense. I hope you, most of you guys would have interacted with one of us through click or through phones, or maybe in person even. So as you guys were doing earlier, please feel free to reach out to us anytime. So now coming to the agenda of the session. So first I'll be covering a little bit about the expense management. That is what are the things that a company would look for managing their expenses. What are the challenges they would face, and all those things. Just a second. Oh, sorry. I think there was a problem with the screen sharing. Just a second. Let me just fix that for you quickly. I hope it is visible now. So let me just quickly go back. So coming to the contest, like we have a hashtag Zoho Inspire contest going on. So you can post it on Twitter as well as LinkedIn. And the top 3 posts will get goodies and $50 partner credits. So you can see it on the screen, hashtag Zoho Inspire. And this was the next slide which we were showing. Oh, sorry, just a minute. Let me just fix that up. I think it would be good now. So I was opening it in a different tab, so maybe some issues with that. So yeah, so all good now. So please let me know if you face any issues further. Okay, so V3 would be handling today's session. So Ramesh, who takes care of the partner engagement, and Fayaz, who takes care of pre-sales for Zoho Expense. And you guys would know us mostly, like we would have interacted some one way or the other. And now coming to the agenda for the today's session. So first I'll be talking about expense management. I'll give you a brief about what the expense management domain is all about, how or what are the challenges that businesses face while during the expense management, and how we can address them. So so that will understand, or that will give you, okay, why the Zoho Expense is required in a business, or like how Zoho Expense can help out a business with their expense management. Then we will go deeper into the product. That is, we will give you a complete product demo, and Ramesh would be handling that session. So it will be a 1-hour session in which we will explain each and every bit of Zoho Expense application. Then we will move on to onboarding. That is how you can onboard a customer onto Zoho Expense. That is, what are the steps that you have to follow? What are the things that you have to make sure you get from your customers before setting up the organization, or before onboarding your client onto Zoho Expense. And that session would be done by Fires. And finally, like we will talk about what is new or what is going to come in Zoho Expense, then how Zoho Expense would be an opportunity for our partners, and finally we will take up the questions. But you can post your questions now itself. Like we have a couple of people, I mean, Faiz and Ramesh itself handling the questions parallelly. So please feel free to post your questions at any point of this session. Now coming to expense management. So I would like to start with explaining how critical the travel and expense management is in a company and how its control should be there, or like effective control should be in place for the travel and expense management. So when I say travel and expense management, as you guys all know, the travel industry is a bit low right now. So expense management, like let's take any kind of business expenses. So I have a couple of stats from a JP Morgan survey, which says around 12% of a company's annual budget is on travel and expense. So that's just on travel and expense. And if it is business expense, it will be even more than that. That is second to payroll. So payroll is the largest, and the second largest expense would be the travel and expense. And if you don't have a proper control in place, it can lead to overspending, and that overspending can even lead to a 1/5 of your total T&E budget on an average. So this is a very big amount of money. So if you think about a startup or like a small company, most of their profit margin itself is around 12% or like 10 to 12%, which is going to be used for the expense management, or like which is going to be used for business expenses. To manage that kind of an expense, definitely a control is required. You definitely should have a control for that kind of a big expense. And what are the different processes, or like what are the different actions involved in an expense reporting process? In most of the companies, you would see like the employees would be logging their expenses, then they would be submitting the expense report, then it will be going for a manager approval, that is your line manager approval, then a finance approval, and finally the reimbursement. So if there is a credit card involved, the reimbursement part will not be there, but other than that, every other process is the same. The employees have to log all their expenses, submit the report, approval, and finally reimbursement. So what are the challenges that a company would face in the expense reporting process? Employees would be losing paper receipts. So I have lost a lot of receipts like 4 to 5 years back, and I've lost money because I couldn't submit expense. I mean, to submit my receipts. I know that like most of us who are in this session would also have undergone the same. That is, you would have lost at least one receipt and lost money because of that work, because of that reason. Because employees, like we travel a lot, or like we incur a lot of expenses, and we don't keep a track or like save those receipts properly, and finally we end up losing money. They've and employees fail to submit the expense reports on time. So let's imagine if it's a corporate card expense. So I purchase like a lot of things using my corporate card. I purchase a coffee maker for my office, or like let's say I purchased a laptop for my office. I use my corporate credit card for the purchases. Since the money was not spent from my pocket, I don't have the urge to submit the expense report to my finance team. So what will happen? The finance team will not get the right information, or like the right the right expense information to close their accounts. So they don't submit the expense reports on time, which leads to a late accounting process. The expense reports are scattered across spreadsheets. So I would have incurred a lot of expenses last month. Maybe I would have paid for a meal, or a lunch at my office for some employees or for some clients, or so some or I would have gone for a travel. So those kind of expenses, I might have missed to report those kind of expenses, and I would have to go back and find out where the receipt is, what date it is, whether I had already submitted it, whether I have created a spreadsheet for it, etc. And the same happens with the manager or with the approval process. The finance team also would have to go through a lot of emails, downloaded spreadsheets, and all to understand where that expense information is. And on top of that, manual review of policy violations. Every company have certain rules. They shouldn't incur expenses, like let's say more than $100 for a hotel room, or more than $15 for a lunch. So those kind of rules are to be followed, and that has to be verified. So the employee cannot verify it because employee might not know that. Same is the case with the finance team or the manager, they will have to manually go through the policy document and understand what is the spend limit for each kind of expense and then review the expense. That will in turn delay the entire approval process, the reconciliation, the review, and the approval. So everything gets delayed, and that makes the process very hectic. So these challenges itself are a big need for an expense management solution to be in place. So we should have a central place where you can manage all your expenses, the policies, that is your rules, the budgets. So each department will have a certain budget set. Like say, let's say marketing, you can spend up to say $5,000 per month. So that kind of budget, like are we exceeding the budget on marketing? Are we exceeding the budget on sales travel or campaigns? So though that kind of an understanding or a real-time visibility have to be there when for your expense management solution. Streamlining the entire expense reporting process across the organization. So maybe like you might have 100 branches or like businesses across various countries in the across the globe. So you should have a unified process across your organization for the expense reporting and a better visibility on spend, like where you're exactly spending. So how much I have spent on this particular client on this project. So that kind of a visibility is required to understand whether I should renew that particular project with that particular client. So, so these are like high level numbers which any CXO might ask the finance team to produce. And accessibility of data at any time. So you are at home or you are at maybe you're traveling. How can you access the data? You should be able to access it without a spreadsheet or without your laptop, be it on mobile or tablet or anything. Then finally, the auto detection of fraud and policy. So fraud can happen. Like it might be, I mean, I'll name it as fraud, but it might be a mistake or it might be even like sometimes like the employees might become over smart. So both can happen, but still it has to be detected and it has to be flagged as a violation. So these kind of things are what a company would look for in an expense management solution, and that is what we would cater in Zoho Expense. So now we will explain like how the product is. Like we will deep dive into the actual product Zoho Expense and see how Zoho Expense can cater for all your business requirements on expense management. So over to you, Ramesh, for the product demo.
Thank you, Vinny. I'll take it from here. Hi, everyone. This is Ramesh from Zoho Expense. I will be giving you a product demo of Zoho Expense right now. I believe everyone is able to view my screen and able to hear me. If so, please respond in the chat box so that we can continue. Thank you so much for that. So this is how Zoho Expense looks like. As Uni gave an introduction of the application, we have, Zoho Expense is mainly going to be an employee expense reporting tool where employees will be able to submit their expenses for approval and get them reimbursed from the company. And as we talk about that, when we talk about expense reporting and approvals, we have three different roles in Zoho Expense based on which, the application is completely purely based on. So we have a submit a user role, which is basically the end user role. So at any point of time, the submit a user role would look something like this, where submitters will only be able to create expenses and submit their expenses for approval. So as you can see, they'll have options only to create expenses or upload receipts, add their cards or add advance payments, etc. And the second user role would be the approver user role, where approver users will have additional modules for approving expense reports on top of submitting their own expenses for approval. So they'll have the reports approval section where you can find expense reports which are directly submitted to you. And finally, we will have the admin user role, where admins will be able to set up the entire application on top of approving and submitting their own expenses. So as an admin, you will be able to add or remove your users. You can configure the settings, set up integrations with different applications. You can create policies where you will be able to set rules or limits or violations, etc. And you can also manage your budgets in here. So that's basically how each user role in Zoho Expense is going to work. So just before we start and look at the submitters or the approvers user role, I'll show you how the users and the policies will be set up in Zoho Expense. So initially, when you sign up for Zoho Expense, under the users section, you will be able to add the users within the application. Just a moment. So yeah, so under this section, at any point of time, you will be able to add your users, and when you add your users, you will be able to set up the name or the email address of that particular user, and you can choose to what role the person is going to be with, and the policy of that person, and to whom they'll be submitting their expense reports for. We also have options for you to import your users as a CSV file, or we have integrations with other suites which you can use to import your users into Zoho Expense. When you add a user, apart from providing these information, we will also have options for you to set up if they are going to be an admin or an approver, you will also be able to set up approves and forwards to, where using which it is possible for you to set up multiple levels of approval in this case. So that is something which can be done. And on top of that, you will also be able to manage your roles. So apart from the existing three roles that we have, admin, approver, and submitter, it is possible for you to create custom roles within the application and assign the same to the users. So for an example, if you would like to have an accountant to use the application, and let's say the accountant will have very minimal access to the application, then you will be able to restrict them by cloning one of these roles, or you can create a new user role within the application. So here you will be able to define what permissions you can provide to the users by each module. So for trip requests, that is a travel request we have. So here you can set up who will view, what type of reports they'll be able to view, and what type of reports they can approve. And similarly for expense reports, you can set up the same. So you will be able to set up important restrictions such as overwriting the exchange rates on the expense creation, or you can just remove the approval access from the users and just provide them the access to view all the company's expense reports. So these are some changes that you can do within the role. So apart from setting up this, you will also be able to configure what type of settings can be configured by this custom role. So you can define if any of these modules can be accessed or modified by the custom role. So you can just click on the checkbox and you will be able to enable the required settings for the users. So that's something you can do. And apart from this, under the users section, you will also be able to set up departments. So you can create different departments within the application, and you can also have a department head for each of your departments. So basically, by setting up departments in Zoho Expense, this can be used in different ways. So you can use it for approval workflows. So whenever an expense report is submitted for approval, based on the department of the user, you can trigger custom approval workflows for the users. And similarly, these department information can also be shown on any of the exported reports from Zoho Expense. So that is something which can be done. So that's about the user section. And with the policies, you will be able to configure different types of rules, as I told you. So by default, when you sign up to Zoho Expense, you will have a default policy where you can configure different rules. And if you have a travel policy document for the application, you can upload it over here. So let's say you have a travel policy guide, which needs to be referred by the users before they incur expenses. So this particular document which you upload, here will be available on the dashboard of the user. So at any point of time, they'll be able to refer to the document and record their expenses within the policy violations. So that's something you can do. And you can also set up general rules such as expense amount limits or receipt required limits. So for an example, I can set up an expense amount limit of $1,000. So if a user creates an expense above 1,000 euros, then in that case, it will be considered as a policy violation, and a warning will be shown to the users when they create the expense. And similarly, you can also set a receipt required limit. So let's say in your organizations, all your users use corporate credit cards for incurring their expenses. So in such a case, reconciliation becomes a very big problem. So for each transaction, you might need a receipt to reconcile each transaction with the receipts that the users have uploaded. So to make it easier, you can set up the receipt required limit as $0. So any expense that is created above €0 or dollars, it will be considered as a policy violation if the user does not attach a receipt with the expenses. So that's something you can do. And again, you can make description mandatory for the policy users, and you can allow uncategorized expenses to be also part of expense reports. So that's something you can do. And you will also have options to manage your categories under this section. So as a company, you might have a large list of chart of accounts or GL codes available. Basically, chart of accounts can be added as expense categories in Zoho Expense. So if you feel that you don't want your users to have a look at all the categories that you have inside your application, you can restrict that under this section. So basically, you can enable or disable whatever categories which needs to be seen by the users, and only the categories which are checked on under this tab will be shown to the users when they go to create an expense. And similarly, you can also set up expense amounts or receipt required limits for each of the categories that you have. So for air travel expense alone, I can set up a separate limit for 2,000 euros and a receipt required limit of 100. So I can set up something like this within the application, and this will be applied only when air travel expense is chosen as a category by the users. And similarly, you can also configure mileage and per diem expenses, the preferences in here. So for the mileage preferences, you will basically be able to choose what type of unit this is going to be, and you can choose a category for mileage expenses. So and you can also add your mileage rates in here. So when you add a mileage rate, you will be asked to provide a start date from which you would like to use this rate. So you get a start date over here, and you can provide your rate over here and hit on save. So this is something you will be able to do within the mileage preferences. And of course, based on your preferences, you can enable or disable this mileage tab for your users. So let's say if some users in your organization do not require mileage expenses to be incurred, then for users alone, you will be able to disable the mileage tab using this option. So that is something you can do. And also we have local mileage preferences based on the editions. So let's say, for example, if you're going for the UK edition of Zoho Expense, you will have an option to set up a limit, and you will have an option to basically set two different rates based on the mileage norms followed in UK. You can have one rate between 0 to 10,000 kilometers and one rate above 10,000 kilometers. So that is something which can be done within the application, and for each users, their business might be tracked at the back end by the application. So that's something which can be done. And also with the per diem expenses, you can add a per diem rates within the application based on the location. So at any point of time, you will be able to add your per diem expenses by choosing a country or by choosing the city. So you can choose what city it is going and what country it is going to be, and based on this combination, you will be able to add your per diem rates within the application. So let's say, for example, let me set up a rate for India. Say for Mumbai, I can just set up a limit in INR. For let's say 100 rupees. So I can set up different types of per diem limits like this. Per diem allowances like this based on the locations that you can configure. And if you have a specific per diem requirement based on travel has, you can also achieve that using this option. So for some organizations, there might be an option where you would like to set up per diem rates in such a way that whenever the employee or the user is traveling on the first or the last day, then in that case they should not receive the complete allowance, and they should receive only a percentage of the total per diem allowance, and only in the medieval days they get the complete allowance. So that is something, again, you will be able to set up in here. So you can set up durations, a travel duration in terms of hours. So if a particular user is anytime between these hours, so you can have the percentage to be 20%. In all the other cases, you can have the percentage set up as 100%. So that is something you will be able to configure within the per diem options. So if you basically set up 20% here for between 0 to 6 hours, so whenever a user adds a per diem expense with the duration as less than 6 hours or between 0 to 6 hours, then 20% of the per diem rate will be provided as an allowance to the user. So that is something you can do. And again, with the policies, you will be able to enable or disable the mileage and the per diem preferences completely based on the amount of policies you have. So that can be done. And just like this policy which I just showed you, you can add as many policies you need for your company. So based on your requirement, you will be able to create a policy, and then you can specify what limits or rules need to be applied for that particular policy. So it is just that once policies have been created, you need to assign the policy to the respective users within your application. So whenever you add a user into the application, you will have an option to choose what policy to which they belong to, and based on the policy you choose, the users will be assigned accordingly. So that is something which can be done. So that's about how this works. And that's about how users and policy sections work. Let me just move over to the travel and expense part, where I'll show you how travel requests and expenses can be created and submitted. So this is how I told you the submitters section would look like. And as I told you, in terms of expenses, the easiest way to create an expense is by uploading a receipt to the application. So at any point of time, you will be able to upload your receipts from the receipt inbox section. So you can just drag and drop your receipts into this block, or you can just simply click here to attach the receipts from the computer or from the cloud. Once these receipts are uploaded into the application, the receipts will be automatically undergoing an OCR process, where the receipts will be automatically scanned for important details such as amount, merchant name, and currency. Once these details are fetched out, the receipts will be recorded as expense entries like the ones that you see here. So that's how it would work. And we will also have mobile applications of Zoho Expense in the iOS and Android platforms. So the end users in your organization can also use our mobile applications to record, upload their receipts into the application. And our mobile applications are mainly designed for the end users in your organization, who will be able to capture receipts. They can manage their credit card transactions, submit all their expenses for approval. So that is something which can be done using the mobile applications. And let me just show you how the receipt will look like once the scanning is complete. So as you can see, on the left side, you will be able to find the receipt, and on the right side, you will be able to find the details which I told you. So you will have information like expense date, the merchant name, and the amount as a currency. So that's how it works. And if a user records an expense in a different currency other than their base currency, so whenever you create an organization in Zoho Expense, you will be able to set the base currency for your organization. And if a user records an expense in a different currency, then the exchange rates will be automatically fetched out into the application. So you will be able to, the exchange rate showing up in here based on the expense date. So whatever date I choose, based on the expense date, the exchange rates are going to be automatically fetched in. So that is how you can do that. And on top of this, we can also forward your receipts from your email inbox. So let's say if you have an air ticket or a lodging ticket which you have email inbox, and that needs to be uploaded as a receipt into Zoho Expense, you can just simply forward them over to this email address which you see here. So at any point of time, you will be able to forward your receipts to this, and each user in the organization will have their own unique receipt forwarding address to which they can forward their individual receipts to. And each of these addresses that you see here will be tied with the individual user's Zoho Expense account. So that's how it works. And apart from recording expenses using receipts, you can also record this manually. So from the expenses section, you can click on the plus icon over here, or you can click on the plus new button here to create your expenses manually. So this section, as you see here, shows the option to record the expenses. So here you will be able to put in the details that you need and save your expense. Any field that is highlighted as in red is considered as a mandatory field within the application. And apart from these fields, all the other fields that you see here can be customized by the admin. So for example, you can enable the required fields you need based on your convenience. So if you need a customer field or a project field, you can enable those fields, and the same will be shown to the users when they go to create an expense. So that can be done. Let me just create a manual expense and I'll show you how it works. So you can just put in the merchant name and you can choose the category for the expense. So for the very first time alone, whenever you record with a new merchant, you would have to categorize the expenses manually. From the second time, the application will automatically categorize the expenses that you create with the same merchant. Let's say, if you have already created an expense with Amazon, and let's say you categorize it as office supplies. Then the second time you create a similar expense using the merchant name Amazon, the category is going to be auto-populated as office supplies by the application itself. And on top of this, you can also itemize your expenses into multiple line items. So let's say if you feel like you associate a tip which was charged on this expense, or let's say there is a different line item which has a different tax rate which needs to be associated. So you can just choose the corresponding line items category, and you will be able to associate the taxes accordingly in here. And again, with the taxes, these can be configured by the admin's application. And also based on your editions, the taxes will be shown automatically. So for example, if you're going for the Indian edition, GST rates will be shown. And if you're going for the UK edition, VAT will be shown. So that's something which can be done. So let's just say, for example, I'm going to choose VAT for both these expenses. So I can put in whatever tax rates I need, and I can put in the amount here. So let's say $45 and let's say 60 euros. So I can put in the amount for the expenses over here. So once it is done, what you can basically do is you will be able to put in the other details that are required for this expense. And also you can mark if this tax amount is going to be exclusive or inclusive. So you can mark the entire expense amount as inclusive, or if it's going to be exclusive of the total amount. So that's something you can here. So let me just save this expense. So once it is saved, your expense would look something like this. And also you will be able to create mileage and per diem expense apart from these options. So you can record your mileage expenses using the add mileage tab. So as I told you earlier, you can basically set up rates, mileage rates for your expenses. So based on the rates, mileage expenses can be recorded in different modes. If you're using the web application, you can record mileage expenses using the distance traveled, where you can put in the total number of miles you have traveled, and the amount will be automatically calculated. If you're using the odometer reading option, you can put in the start and the end reading, and based on the distance will be calculated, and eventually amount will also be populated. So let's say for something like this, I can put in something like this as the start and the end reading, and you can see the distance has got auto populated. So that is something you will be able to do within the application. And if you're using mobile applications of Zoho Expense, you can record mileage expenses using the GPS on your phone. So using the GPS, it's more of a two-step process. So all you need to enable the GPS on your phone, and you need to click on start button inside Zoho Expense application to start recording your miles. And that's something you can. And if you're using an iPhone, you can record mileage expenses using the Apple Maps feature, where it is possible for you to put in the start and the end location, and based on which you can record his expenses. And apart from this, we will also have options for recording per diem expenses. Let me just show you that. So when you go to get an expense, just a moment. Yeah. So when you go to create an expense, you will also see the add per diem and bulk add per diem tabs within the application. So using that, it is possible for you to record your per diem expenses within the application. So like I told you, the users will be able to choose the travel location, and based on the travel location, the amount will be auto populated. So they can either choose the default rate or the location rate, based on which they can get their per diem allowances reimbursed. And if you have multiple per diem rates, which per diem expenses which needs to be recorded together, you can possibly use the bulk add per diem option to record multiple per diem expenses based on a date range. So all you need to do is you need to choose a location, and you can choose a date range between which you to record this expense. So based on the date range, a per diem expense will be created for each expense date within that date range. So that is something which can be done. So once you provide these in here, and you can just go ahead and hit on save, 10 different per diem expenses will be created under your expenses section. So this is how it would basically look like once you create those per diem expenses using the bulk add per diem tab. And apart from this, we will also have the bulk add expenses tab, where let's say if you would like to add multiple expenses together, and let's say you would like to go old school and record all the expenses manually, you can use this option to record them. So this allows you to record multiple expenses together. You can add up to 30 expenses together using this particular tab. So all you need to do is you need to fill out the required details in here, and based on the details, you can just go ahead and continue the expense creation. So that is something which can be done here. And if you have receipts for these line items, you can also attach receipts using this option. So you can the receipt which you attach from here will just be considered as attachments, and it will not undergo the OCR process, since you will be filling out all the details when you create this expense line item. And if you feel that there are certain columns which are not required for these list of expenses that you're creating, you can customize the columns as well. So let's say if you feel that you don't have a reference number for these expenses which you will be recording, or a description is not mandatory, then in that case, as an end user, you can disable these fields temporarily while recording the expenses. And later on, if needed, you put in the details by each expense. So that is something which can be done here. And on top of all this, it is also possible for you to connect your cards within the app. So apart from the options which we saw for recording expenses, you can also add your cards with the application. So you can either add a corporate card or a personal card with Zoho Expense. So once you add a corporate card, the transactions from the card will be showing up in the application as expenses. So let me just switch over to an organization where I have this available. So under the cards section, so your cards will be basically listed out like the ones that you see here. So you can just click on any particular that you need, and this will show you the transactions from the bank's website into the application. So for corporate card transactions, we basically have a feature called as auto matching to creating expenses. So when you enable this feature, every time a corporate card transaction comes into the application, the transaction will be automatically matched up with the receipt that you had uploaded the application. So let's say if you consider this $878 expense, once I incurred this expense, basically what I'll do as a user is I'll take a picture of the receipt and I'll put it into the application. Once it's uploaded, the receipt will undergo the OCR process, and the same will be recorded as an expense entry. And later on, when the transaction comes in through the corporate card, the transaction will be automatically matched up with the receipt I had uploaded based on the date, amount, and currency. So that is something which you can do within the application. And so with this, option to automatically match up the receipts, the receipts are going to be directly matched up with every transaction that comes in, and it makes it easier for the users to manually match each receipt with the transaction. And so basically, when it comes to corporate credit cards transactions, all corporate card transactions are going to be considered as non-reimbursable by the application. So it would not be possible for you to mark a corporate card expense as reimbursable at any point of time. So that's how the cards section works. Apart from connecting a corporate card, you can also connect a personal card with the application. And with personal cards, any transaction that is incurred through a personal card will be fetched in as a transaction into Zoho Expense as well. And it is up to the users to decide what transactions can be recorded as expenses and which need not be. For example, if I consider this personal card, so you can see the all transactions in here. There might have been some transactions which I can exclude from the application as well. So at any point of time, let's say if this particular transaction is something which is personal and you don't want to submit it for reimbursement to your company, you can always exclude the transaction from the unexpensed section, and it will show up under the excluded transactions, meaning this transaction need not be submitted and it will be excluded from the card. So that's how personal cards can be connected within the application. And from this, we will also have options for you to create a trip requests within the application. So to create a trip request, you can just go to the trips section. So say you would like to submit a travel request before you're going to record the expenses. Let's say you're going for an event for 10 days and you would like to get some kind of an authorization from you, and your company makes all your travel bookings and all the tickets, etc. So for that case, you can use the trips module. So from here, it is possible for you to provide all the details that you need under the trips trip request section. So you can choose the travel type, if it's going to be domestic or international. If it's international, you can add fields like if visa is required or not, and the destination country, etc. And you can provide your business purpose for this trip under this section. And if there is a budget amount, you can provide the budget amount over here as well. So whatever budget amount that you put in, the budget amount can be created as an advance payment to the user whenever they before they go for the trip. So that's something which can be done. If you have other travelers who will be traveling with you and you would like to notify that in this trip request, you can just notify which travelers will be traveling with you, and you can specify on which dates you're traveling. So for an example, I can put in the dates between which I'll be traveling. So I can put in the cities like this. And let's say, for example, from I'm going to go on the 1st May, and let's say I'm going to return back on the 15th May. So I can put in the details and I can put in the description for that travel request as well. And if you have a seat preference or if you have a meal preference for your travel request, you can also provide that over here as an itinerary. And if multiple line items, if you need like different flight requests, you can use this option to do that. So let's say if you're going on an international trip and you would like to have another flight outside the country, you can specify the cities and the details over here. So that is something which can be done. And you can also specify what type of hotel reservations you require, and if you require a car rental or a ferry, any other type of travel mode or travel request that you need for your trip request. So you can specify the exact details in here, and once you specify all the details, you will be able to just go ahead and hit on save and submit. So this will submit your trip request based on whatever approval policy that is configured within the application. So as an admin user, for travel request or an expense report or for an advance payment, you can configure different approval policies. So based on the approval policies, the reports or the trips or the advance payments will be sent to the intended users. So for example, if you have a dedicated travel team in your company, you can make sure that any trip request is submitted to the travel team. So the travel team can review the request, make the bookings, and then approve this trip request as well. So that is something which can be done within the application. So that's how you can do it. And once it is submitted, the approver user will receive email notifications for the trip request which has been submitted, and they can reply back to you under by approving the trip request. Once it's approved again, the submitters will receive email notifications for the same. So that's something you can do with this option. And let me just create the expense. Let's submit the expenses which we have created, and I'll show you how it would work. And also before that, the advance payments section is basically where you can raise a request for. So at any point of time, you can just click on the record advance. So if you have configured an approval workflow for advance payments, then you will have the option to request your advance. So right now in my organization, I do not have an approval workflow set up for advance payments. So I can just directly go ahead and record an advance payment for my expenses. So I can choose the pay amount through which I'll be receiving the advance payment from the company, and I can provide a note for this advance payment as well. So once an advance payment is created, users will be able to sign these advance payment on their expense reports which they create. So every time I create an expense report and try to submit it for approval, I will be able to apply the advance payments which I have created within the application. So that is something which can be done. And let me just switch back to the right organization, and I'll show you how expense can be submitted for approval. So let me just request for an advance payment here. This has been submitted. Once my advance payment gets approved, I can apply it on my expense reports. So that can be done here. And in terms of submitting the expenses for approval, basically select which expenses that you would like to submit for approval. So you can just select the required expenses that you would like to submit for approval. So let's just say I'm going to submit these 3 expenses for approval. So I can select the expenses that I'd like to submit, and I can hit on add to report and add this to an expense report. So any expense in Zoho Expense needs to be included into an expense report and submit for approval. You cannot submit individual expenses for approval. So let's just say something like this. I can provide a report title, and once the report is hit, this is how you will see the expenses showing up. And if there is any policy violation on your expenses, the same can be seen on top of the expense. So like we discussed, if there is an expense amount violation or a receipt violation, you can see all those violations on top of your expenses. So right now I see the uncategorized violation. So meaning my expenses have not been categorized and it's considered as a violation. So let me just go ahead and specify the right category for my expenses. So let's just say something like this. And so I can fill out the required details I need for each of these expenses. And once that is done, you can just go ahead and hit on submit, which will submit your expense based on whatever approval policy that is configured within your organization. And again, every time a report is submitted for approval, the approver user will receive email notification saying that it's been submitted. And similarly, when it's approved or rejected or reimbursed, submitter users will receive notifications for the same as well. And as a submitter user or as an end user, if you feel that you would like to make some changes or modifications to your expense report after it has been submitted, you can do the same using the recall option. So at any point of time, you can just click on the recall button and you will be able to recall your expense report, make the modifications. So let's say I forgot to associate tax with this expense. I can choose the tax on the expense and I can hit on save. Once the changes have been made, I can just go ahead and resubmit the expense report, and the report will be submitted to the same person for approval. So that is how it can be done. And this recall option is something which is available only until the report is in the submitted status. Once it's been approved or rejected, you will not be able to do the same. And also with regards to any submission or recall, any that is made on your expense report, all these can be tracked under the history section of your expense report. So this is something which will be shared among the approvers as well as the submitters. So both the users can view what has happened in the expense report. So that's about this. And if you feel like you need to share this expense report to another person within the application, just to get an opinion or an idea, you can share it with another user in the application itself. So that is something you can do. And on top of all this, if you have documents or any important attachments which needs to be attached on a report level, you can attach them over here. So let's say if you have an expense which is incurred in foreign currency, and apart from the receipt, if you have any supporting documents which needs to be attached, you can drag and drop them over here on a report level. So you can attach more 5 files to your expense report, and each can be of size 7 MB. And you can also download your reports at any point of time as a PDF, or you can download it as a Excel or CSV, and you can download the receipts alone separately as a zip file, or you can take a printout of this report as well at any point of time. So that is something which you can do with expense reports. And on top of all this, every user in your organization will have their own analytics section where they can run reports on any expenses that they have submitted within the application. So let's just say you're required to submit a report on a monthly basis on how much you've submitted by each account or category within your company. You can just take the report from the section. So you will have options to run reports on any expenses that you have submitted. You can customize it based on whatever date range that you need. You can put in a current date range or a previous date range, or you can custom date range over here. And you can also apply the required filters you need. Let's say I need to download only the approved reports from the application. I can choose what filter I need and what type of other options that I need. So I can put in whatever filters I need in here, and it's possible for you to run the report under this section. And it is also possible for you to schedule this report to be received via email. So if you have a particular frequency based on which you would like to receive this report, you can schedule the report, and you can also download this report as a PDF or a CSV or an Excel file as well. For certain reports, we have also supported pie charts where you can run and find out what is the correct proportion of each category. So that is something which can be seen. So that's about how you can use the analytics section and how end users can create expenses and submit them for approval. Let me just switch over to the approver side, and I'll show you how expense reports and advance can be approved. So as an approver user, as I told you, you will have the reports approval section where it is possible for you to approve the expense reports directly submitted to you. So if you have options to, if you are a trip approver or an advance payment approver, then you will have modules where you can find trips approval and advance approval section as well. So if you're going to approve the advance payments, you can click on the advance approval section, and you can view the expense advance which was submitted to you. You can review advance payment. You can either edit it and change the amount or any other information on this advance payment, or you can just go ahead and approve it or reject it or delete the entire request itself. So once you approve this request, you can apply this advance payment on the expense reports which were created. So that is something which can be done. And coming back to the reports approval side, for whenever you go to approve your expense report, you can just click on the expense report which was submitted to you for approval. So as an approver, it is possible for you to review the expenses, or you can just click on the category of the expense and you can view the details of the expense. And for some cases, if you feel that you need to make some modifications on the expense report, you can definitely do that as an approver. So let's say if my user has chosen wrong category for the expense, or let's say the tax associated with my expense is incorrect, or any other information on the expense is incorrect, as an approver, I will be able to update the changes on the expense, and I can click on the update button. So let's say for this tax amount, let's say it is inclusive of the total amount. I can click on this option, and I can just hit on update. So when you update the information, you can either notify the submitter user regarding this you've done, or you can just simply skip this part and save the changes that you've done on your expense. And you can also pass comments on the expenses which are submitted by users. So if one of the expenses in the report is missing a receipt to be attached in the expense, you can just pass a comment to the user and ask for the reason for missing the receipt. So you can just post a comment like this, and whenever you hit on send, the comment will be posted on the expense report. And you can also configure customized notifications which can be triggered to the users. So you can trigger an email notification to the user whenever a comment is added on the expense report. So based on the email notification, I can reply back to you under the same comment section, and you can take your approval further. So that's something which can be done. And if there are multiple expenses in a single report, then it is also for you to reject individual expenses from the report. So let's say one of these expenses do not comply with your policies, or let's say you feel that this expense is too old to be submitted, you can just reject button, and you will be able to specify the reason for your rejection as well. So you can provide what reason and why this expense report was rejected. I mean, you can specify reason. So let's say something like too old to be submitted. So I can provide a particular reason and I can hit on confirm. So once this expense is rejected, it will go back to the user's account as an unsubmitted or an unreported expense. So the users can view what was the rejection reason for the expense, and if there are any changes which needs to be done, they can update the changes on the expense and resubmit it back again if required. So that is again something which can be done from the end user's perspective. And as an approver, apart from this, if needed, you can also attach receipts or documents on an expense report level. You will not be able to associate it on an expense level. You can do it on a report level. You can drag and drop the supporting documents or attachments for this particular expense report, and the same can be used by the users. So that's how you can click on the more option, and you will also have options to download the report as a PDF, or you can reject the entire report. When you reject the report, you can provide a reason for the rejection as well. And again, in this case, once rejected, the status of the report will change as rejected. And the users can have a look at the rejection reason. If they require to resubmit the report after making the changes, they can do it as well. So for any case, I mean, whenever you reject an expense or a report, the same can be submitted back again if there are any modifications need to be done and resubmitted. So that can be done here. And just like the submitter user, you can also download the report as a PDF, print it or export it as an Excel or CSV, or download the receipts alone separately as a zip file. And yeah, so as you can see here, you have an option to apply the advance payment on the expense report. So whenever a user's payment is approved, you can just click on the apply advance payment option, and you can just choose the required advance payment which needs to be applied on my report, and click on the apply button over here. So let's just say I'm going to apply this 2,000 euro of advance payment on my expense report. So once it is applied, you can see that this is how your amount reimbursed will look like. If you remember closely, previously the report amount to be reimbursed was 200 was somewhere around 150 euros, and now the amount has negative. That is because a 2,000 euro advance payment was provided to the user, and the user has used only 150 euros of the total advance amount which was provided. And see what list of advance payments were applied on your expense report. You can have a look at them in here, and you can also see if what changes were made in terms of the expense total. So that can be found out here. So once, as an approver, let's say you've made all the reviews and you've made all the changes and you're ready to hit on approve, so you can just click on the approve button. And if you configured multiple levels of approval, configured within the application, you can just, once the first level approver approves the report will be automatically forwarded to the next person for further approval. So you can, at any point of time, click on the approve button over here, and your expense report will be automatically pushed over to the next person, the approval workflow. So that's something which can be done. So let's just say I'm going to approve the report in here. Once you approve the report will be no more available in this section, and it has been automatically forwarded to the next person. So let's say, as a first level approver, if you feel that I need to keep a track of which reports I approved within the application. I need to find out which reports I approved, and then it was forwarded to the next person. So that can be something which can be viewed by the approvers from the reports module. So our own reports module, you will have the filter for finding out which reports were shared. So you can just click on the shared with me filter, and from here you will be able to find the reports which you had approved earlier. So if you just click on the view the approval workflow, you can find who has approved the report, and who is pending to be approved within the within the application. So that is something which can be done in here. And as an approver user, you can also use our mobile applications to approve or reject your expense reports at point of time. So apart from submitting your own expenses for approval, you will also have options to approve your expense reports from the mobile apps as well. So you can just see the same reports section being available on the mobile, and any reports can be approved or rejected from there as well. So that's something you can do. So that's about this. And apart from the reports section, the main differences between a submitter and an approver user would be the control to approve or reject expense reports. Apart from this, every other module that you see here is completely what we saw for a submitter user. So just like the submitter users, you will also have a dashboard where you will have shortcuts to add your expenses or upload your risk reports, and you can see what expenses you have submitted within the application, and a summary of the reports and your recent reports as well. And you can use the receipt inbox or the expenses or card sections to create expenses and submit them for approval. And just like any other user, you can also raise advance payments or trip requests within the application. So that's something which can be done. So the roles, the user roles are basically built up on this. So every user at a basic level will be able to create expenses in the application. So be it an admin or an approver or you can record your own expenses and submit them for approval. And on top of all this, you will have the approval permissions, or the configuring the application permissions, etc. So that is about the approver side. So let me just quickly switch over to the admins side, and I'll show you what admins can do on top of all these. So as an admin user, like I told you, you will have the three different types of approval process. So as an admin, you can have a look at all the types of approval modules within the application. So any trip or a report or an advance which is submitted to you, you can also view, you can always view it under this section. And in any type of these tabs, you will have two different sections. So one section where you can find expense reports which were directly submitted to you, and there will be another section where you can find all the company's expense reports. So you will be able to have a look at any expense report which was submitted or approved within your application. So you can just click on the expense report which was submitted to you, or any company. You can just have a look at what were the details which were included into this expense report. So you can have a look at the expenses which were included, to which users it was submitted for approval. And just like the approver user, you will also have options to edit your expenses or view the details on your expenses. If there are any changes to be made on the expenses, you can do it definitely as a user. Let's say this user has missed out to choose a tax for this expense. I can associate the respective tax with the expense, and I'll be able to update the same information on this expense. And the same way, you can also pass comments on your expenses or view the comments which were passed earlier on these expenses. And if the expenses need to be rejected from the report, you can do it as a final or an admin approver. And once you have made all the changes, apart from this, you can also have a look at the advance payments which were included into your report. So let's say this particular advance payment is something which should not be included within this report. Let's say the advance payment was provided for a different trip, but unfortunately it was associated with this expense. You can remove the advance payment from the expense report, and the amount to be reimbursed will be adjusted accordingly. Or you can go ahead and edit your advance payments before you can approve expense report. So let's say I'm just going to reduce this advance payment to 200 euros. So I can just make the changes on my advance payment while approving my expense report. And you can see that the amount to be reimbursed was immediately modified to just 43 euros. So that is something which you can do at any point of time. And just like the other users, you can also download the report in different formats. And if you have a hierarchy of approval, so let's say in your approval flow, if there are no conditions, but then you have multiple levels of approval, then in such cases, as an admin user, you will be able to forward your expense reports to another approver within the application. So let's say if this particular expense report is fishy and you have some clarifications to be made, and a better person who can review the expense report and then finally approve it, you can definitely do that using the forward option. So using this option, you can forward it to another person, and that person will be able to approve your report and then take it forward from there. So that's something you can do. So once you click on the approve button, the report will be finally approved. So as you can see, once the report gets completely approved, only then the status of the report will be modified as approved. Until then, the report's status is going to be pending approval, or it is going to have a due date based on the due date that you have set up. So it's just that you can have any number of levels of approval for your expense report. When the final approver approves the report status will be modified as approved. Until then, it's going to be in the due status, or it's going to be in the awaiting approval status. And one report is approved, the next step is basically going to be recording reimbursements on your expense report. So if you have if all the expenses in the report are going to be card expenses or non-reimbursable expenses, in that case the amount to be reimbursed will be zero, and you need not record a reimbursement on these expense reports. But on the other reports which have a negative or a positive value as the amount to be reimbursed, in such cases you need to basically record reimbursement on these reports. So right now, in terms of the reimbursements, have the manual reimbursement option, where once you make a payment to the to your employees via reimbursements, via your payroll or check, anything, you can just come back to Zoho Expense and mark those reports as reimbursed using the record reimbursement button. While in the Indian edition of Zoho Expense, we have the option to do an online reimbursements through ICICI. So, if you have a corporate account with ICICI, we can, set up an integration, and you can make reimbursements to your employees via ICICI. So that's something which can be done. And all the other editions, right now we only have the manual reimbursement option, where you can just click on the record reimbursement button. And while you click on the record reimbursement button, if it's going to be online or any type of reimbursement, you will have the option to choose what happens to the balance amount. So basically, in our case, if you had noticed, we applied advance amount which was higher than the total expense report. Expense reports total. So in such case, you will have an option to mark your balance amount if it was received from the user, or if the user can use the remaining amount as another advance payment for their future reports. So you can choose any one of these two options. So this is basically our advance carry forward feature. So when you reimburse an expense report as an admin, you will be able to choose what happens to the balance amount. And this particular reimbursement option is something which will be available only to the admin users in the application. If you would like to have a non-admin user to have this option to record reimbursement, then in that case, you need to create a custom and provide the access to that user to reimburse expense reports. So you can basically just click on the required expense reports. You can just choose type of balance you're going to do it. So let's just say I'm going to provide the expense report is going to be let's just say the expense report, the advance payment returned by the user. So I can choose this, and I can choose a date on which the amount was received. So let's say I received this today. I can choose the date and the reference number. And once I add the date, I can just go ahead and click on the record reimbursement button. And you will see that the report status will change as reimbursed. So just a moment. Sorry about that. So I think I just have a slow internet connection here, so that shouldn't be a problem. Never mind. So once you reimbursement on the report, the status of the report will be modified as reimbursed. And once post this completed, once the report has been approved and reimbursed, you will be able to download your reports from the application. Just say for accounting purposes or finance purposes, you would like to download the reports from the application as a CSV or you can definitely do that. As an admin user, you will be able to download the reports using the export reports option. So you can just click on this button, and you will be able to get reports from the application. So just give me one more. Let me try refreshing my page. I hope that you're able to see my screen now. Okay, so let me just continue from where I left. So we were just going to reimburse the expense report which was submitted. So let me just click on the report which was approved. So I can just click on the record reimbursement button. And like I said, you can choose what you would like to do with the balance amount, and you can click on the record reimbursement button. So once this is done, you can see that the report's status will change as reimbursed in here. And at any point of time, due to some changes, if you would like to undo your reimbursement on the expense report, you can do that as well. And let's say once all the process is completed, let's just say once the report is completely reimbursed and you feel that this is the last step and you do not want to see this report anymore under this section, you can also archive your expense reports. by clicking on the archive button. So when you click on the archive button, the report will not be available under the all reports section, and it would be available only under the archived section. So if you would like to make any changes to the report, or you would like to reject it or undo the reimbursements, or any sorts of changes that you would like to do, all these can be done only by unarchiving this report and bringing it back to the reimbursed status. So that is how you can do it. And as I was telling you, in terms of exporting your reports from the application, so if you would like to export your reports to your finance or your accounting system, you can always do it by using the export reports option that you see here. So using this option, you will be able to set up a template for your expense reports based on which you would like to download the data. So for example, a template allows you to choose what columns you would like to see when you export the data from the application. So let's just say I need the tax information to be included. So I need the tax name, and I need the tax percentage. I need the expense tax amount without the total, and also just the expense tax amount in different currencies. So I can choose what types of fields I need. And once you include them, you will be able to see it in the Excel or the CSV file that you export. So let's just say I can name it something like this, and I can hit on save. So this template can be chosen, and you will also have options for you to export the reports based on a date range. So if you would like to export it based on an expense date or based on an approved date range, you can choose the date range that you need, and you can also filter it based on a particular status. If you would like to download the all approved reports, or if you would like to download only the approved and reimbursed reports. So you can choose what status it can be, and you can also choose the type of file that you would like to download. If you would like to password protect the file, you can do it this way. And if you have any personally identifiable information on the expenses, you can either include them or you can exclude them from your reports. So by default, personally identifiable information will not be included in any exported file, but if you would like to include them, you can use this option to export it. And apart from this, in terms of exporting your reports, you can also use the analytics section. So as an admin user, apart from the other user roles, you will have the complete control over your organization. So you will be able to run reports on any expense reports which were submitted, or any advance payments or reimbursements that were made. So you can track all these details or run reports on them over here. So let's just say you would like to run a report on the policy violations which were made by each user. So let's say you need to find out who is making the most out of the policy violations. Let's say who is making more amount of policy violations. You can use this option to view that. You can also customize this report based on certain filters. So if you would like to add status to it or a report approved date, you can choose the filters and export the data as well. So that can be done. And similarly, you can also run a tax summary report where, if, on an annual basis, or, at the end of the fiscal year, let's just say you would like to, compile all the taxes which were applied on your travel and expenses. So you can use this, the tax summary option to run a report. So you will be able to customize it again based on a date range and run your report. So this will show you the expense amount based on each tax. So when you click on a tax, you will be able to find the expenses which were associated with that particular tax. So that is something which can be done. And this data again can be exported as a PDF or a CSV or an Excel, or you can print it out directly. So that can be done. And apart from this, you can also run reports on the reimbursements that you have already made to your users, or if there are pending reimbursements which needs to be made, you can use the awaiting reimbursements by user option to do that. Or if you'd like to track the advances, you can use the advances by user and find the information from here. So that is something which can be done from here. And you can also run reports on the corporate cards that you have in your organization. So we have a simple report which can be used to find out which corporate cards have unsubmitted transaction amounts, and which has all the transactions been submitted. So you can use this report to run and find out how much amount of unsubmitted transaction amount you have by each card, and that will give you a better idea on who has completely submitted all their expenses, corporate card expenses for approval, and who is yet to do it. And you can also run reports on the trip details, and if you have any budgets, or if you would like to run reports on the logs, you can use the activity logs option to do that. So you can find out what was what the users have done using the application here. So you will see all activity over here. You can also customize it based on what type of activity which was done by the user. If it's an expense or a report or users, you can choose the module with which you would like to see the logs and run the log reports over here. So analytics basically allows you to run reports on any type of expenses or trips or advance payments, as I told you. And all these reports at any point of time can be scheduled and received as an email, or you can download it in different formats which are supported across different reports. So you will be able to download it either as a PDF or an Excel or CSV file from here. And going back to the admin section. So as we discussed earlier, under the admin section, we already saw how users and policies can be added. And apart from this, we will also have options to configure the entire application under the settings. So settings allows you to set up a various list of preferences that need to work in the backend of your application. So we'll just go through each and every one of these setting module that we have. So in terms of the organizational profile, so here you will be able to set up your organization name. You can set up an address, and you can also configure your primary contact over here. Where any important information will be communicated with the primary contact, and you can also configure the language or the fiscal year and the time zone, etc. So all these information will also be fetched out from you when you initially sign up for Zoho Expense. If there are any changes to be done, you can always come back to the organizational profile and change it. And you can also set up your branding in here. You can upload your logo, your company's logo, and you can set up a theme for the application. And under corporate cards, as an admin, you will be able to manage all the corporate cards connected within the application. So there might be cases where, let's say you have a main account with your corporate credit card or your bank, and under the main account, let's say you have around 10 to 15 cards. So you can use the main account's website login credential to connect your cards within the application. And once you connect all the cards, as an admin, you will be able to assign each card to a respective card owner, and then the users will be able to start recording their expenses for approval. So that is something which can be managed here. And you can manage your subscription online using this option, where you will be provided with options to choose the frequency, in which way you would like to record expenses, and you can record it that way. You can configure the trip preferences in here. So you will be able to configure all types of the trip related preferences. So you can so let's say, for example, if you have trip requests for which you would like to automatically create per day allowances, then you can use this option to set it up. So for the domestic trips, let's say you would like to create per day allowances, which needs to be triggered for the domestic trips alone. You can use this option to do that. And you will be able to configure if the trip section needs to be mandatory for each expense report which is submitted. So every time a user creates an expense report, they will be able to associate a trip along with their expense reports. Apart from this, you will also be able to configure what can be done when a trip request is submitted, what can be done when a trip request is approved, and what types of notifications you would like to send out. So let's say, for example, you would like to attach this trip as a PDF file in every notification, in every submission notification which you would like to trigger. You can do that using this option. And apart from the approvers, or let's say a non-user of Zoho Expense likes to receive or find out what trip requests have been submitted within the application, you can use the receive a copy of trip request, and you can provide the email address of that particular user, so that every time a trip request is submitted, an email notification with the PDF of the trip will be sent out to them. So that can be done. And you can also display terms and conditions for your trips. So if you have certain terms and conditions based on which trips needs to be created, you can use this option to do that. And for approval preferences, you can have allow all the approvers to approve their own trip request. If you do not want to do it, you can disable this option. And similarly, just like when the trip is submitted, you can also set up a report, a notification for whenever trip is approved. So that can be done. And you can trigger notifications for all the other types of trip requests that you need. And you can also customize the fields that you would like to see when a user goes to create a trip request. So this is where you can configure what type of itineraries can be included in your trip request, and what type of extra fields or additional fields that you need for your trip request. So let's say every time a user creates a trip, a customer needs to be associated with the trip, so that whenever the trip gets over and when you get all the expenses approved, you can bill back all these expenses to the customer. So you can include the customer and the billable field, so users will be able to mark if the customer what customer is going to be associated with the trip, and if it's going to be billable or not. So that can be done. And you will also be able to configure the custom fields which are required for your trip request. So if there are any custom fields which needs to be included for your trip request, you can specify the label name for the custom field, and you can choose what data type that is going to be. So let's say I'd like to add a drop down to my trip request. I can choose what data type that is going to be, and I can choose what label name I need for that particular trip request field. So that can be done. And most importantly, with respect to the approval process for your trips, you can do it under the custom approval tab. So you can use the custom approval option to add criteria and set up custom approval workflows. So this basically allows you to configure approval workflows based on the information that was provided by the user when they created the trip request. You can specify conditions like, let's say, if the trip request is going to be billable, or you can trigger it based on the budget amount. So whenever a budget amount of the trip is going to be greater than 1,000, then I can add additional levels of approval workflows for my expense report. And if it's going to be less than the budget amount, I can have lesser number of approval workflows to be triggered for the approval workflow. So you can set up whatever types of conditions that you need for each of your trip request, and based on that, the approval workflows can be triggered. And apart from this, just like the trip preferences, you will also be able to configure the expense preferences that you need. So here you will have the option to enable automated currency conversion. Upon disabling this option, you will be able to set up manual currency conversion rates for any given currency. And the users will also be able to add their own currency conversions if required, if you provide the option. So that can be done. And you can also enable the option to create reimbursable expenses by default. So let's say if a vast number of expenses submitted within your organization will be reimbursable, then you can use this option. On the other hand, if most of the expenses submitted are going to be from corporate card, then you can disable this option, where this will allow you to create only non-reimbursable expenses. And you can also set up expense expiry periods. So for each expense, you can have an expiry period. So let's just say I'm going to have an expiry period of 60 days. So any expense which is 60 days or more old, it's going to be considered as a policy violation. Whenever an expense is expired, it will be considered as a policy violation within the application. And if you would like to warn your users, before the expiry date is showing up, you can do this. So some days before the expiry date, the notification will be triggered to the users. And you can also send reminders to them for the unreported expenses they have. So let's say if the user has created the expense, but they have not included it into a report or submitted it for approval, you can trigger daily, weekly, or monthly notifications for the same. And this is the option which we were talking about, the auto match or auto create expenses for corporate card transactions. Disabling this option will allow the users to manually match each transaction with an expense, or record each transaction as an expense, or categorize it as an expense manually. So that can be done. And apart from this, just like the trip fields, you can also customize the expense fields which are shown. So you can enable or disable the required fields you need, or make certain fields mandatory, or if you would like these fields to be shown up on the PDF, you can set it up in here. And you can also add custom fields, just like the trip request fields. You can choose the data type and put in a label name and create your custom fields in here. With the report preferences, you will have extensive amount of preferences which can be set up apart from what we saw in the expenses or trips. So you can configure how you would like to auto generate your expense report numbers. So for each expense report in Zoho Expense, there will be a unique number which will be generated, which is basically like a counter. So it starts from the number 1 and it goes on, as each user creates an expense report within the application. You can configure the prefix of your expense report number, and if needed, you can have a start number, and based on that, the same can be created. And you can also customize the report name which can be generated. So right now, as you would have seen earlier, when I created the expense report, I entered the report title manually. If you would like to automate that process, you can do it. You can use specific placeholders on your expense report. So let's say on an expense report level, customers will be associated. Then you can choose, let's say the customer name has to be displayed on my expense report name, and I'd like to see the owner name, and I'd also like to see the start date of that particular along with the year. So I can choose these 3 placeholders on my report, and it would look something like this. So it would have the customer name followed by the user's name, and it will have the start date of that particular expense report based on the duration. So that's something you can do. And with the PDF options, you can configure how what information needs to be shown on your PDF, and you can choose what font you would like to see on your PDF. So you can either follow the default template, which is the standard template, where you will have the expenses grouped together, and at the end of the PDF, you will have the receipts being showing up. So it would look something like this. So your PDF standard template will look like this. You will have the company logo, the expense report amount to be reimbursed, who submitted it, who approved it, and you will have the expense details grouped in together. And if you have different currencies on your expense report, you can see a report summary by currency. Similarly, if you have a taxes associated with your expenses, the same will also be showing up in here. And if there are any policy violations or comments applied on your reports, the same can be shown on the PDF. And on top of all this, the receipts which are attached along with the PDFs will be included in the PDF copy at the end of the PDF. So that's something you can view in here. And the same way, group by category is just a slight variation on what we saw. So group by category groups all the expenses by a particular category. So by each category, you can find how many expenses were incurred, and you can see the exact other details which we saw on the other report. And this PDF options will also allow you to include how many receipts you need per PDF. So let's say users might include receipts which have multiple pages on them. Let's say if you consider an Uber receipt or any type of ride sharing receipt, you might have multiple pages on the receipt. If you do not want multiple pages to be showing up, you can choose how many receipts you need per page on the PDF. If it's going to be 4 receipts or 9 receipts, and if the trip details needs to be shown on your report PDF, you can enable that, or the report history, etc. And we also have options for you to create custom statuses for your expense report. Apart from the approved, reimbursed, or submitted, rejected statuses, you can have your own custom status for the expense reports. So let us consider a case where you will have a process in between approving a report and reimbursing a report. Every report that is approved within your company will be exported to a particular place, or let's say it is going to be printed as a hard copy and submitted to the finance team. Finance team reviews it and then makes the reimbursement. So if you'd like to identify in what exact phase you are in between the approval and the reimbursement, you can create report custom statuses. So let's say I can create a report custom status like this, and I can consider this as approved. So whenever a report is approved, after approving the report, you will be able to change the report status as printed. So it should look something like this. Let me show you an example. So right now the report status isn't approved, so you can just click on the more option and you will be able to mark the report as printed. So once you change the status, you can see the custom status available on the report. So based on these custom statuses, again, you will also be able to create custom filters within the application. So using the new custom view, you can create what type of filters you need for your expense report. So you can apply a particular criteria. So based on the criteria, so I can have report custom status is printed. So whenever report custom status is printed, I'd like to I'd like to create a particular filter only for these reports. So I can provide a name, and I can also choose whom I'd like to share this view with. If I'd like to share this particular view with all the users in the application or just me, I can decide that. And I'd like to see the different columns that I can see on these expense reports. So I can choose what whatever columns I need for this expense report, and I can hit on save. So once it is saved, you can see that this is the custom view which you can see over here, and that's how it would look. And coming back to the settings, apart from the PDF options and the custom statuses which we saw, you will also have options to configure the notifications of your expenses. So you can basically configure whatever type of notifications that you need, enable or disable the notifications that you need. Let's say if you have an accounting closure period in your accounting software, then you can also configure a last day for the submission of the reports. So after this particular date, users will not be able to submit expense reports in that month. So if I set up 22nd as my last date, after 22nd, users will not be able to submit any expense reports until the end of the month. If they'd like to submit it, they have to submit it in the next reporting cycle. So that is something you can do with the custom with the last day selection. And you can also notify the submitter users. These are basically the default email notifications which will be triggered whenever notifications, whenever you configure them. So by default, all these default notifications will be enabled. And just like the trip request, you can also receive a copy of the report upon expense report submission or upon its approval. And for certain reports, you can for reports you can basically set up a due date. So like we saw earlier, you can set up a due date for each of your reports using this option. So whatever date you provide, within that particular date, the approvers have to basically approve their expense reports. And if the due dates are nearing and the user has not approved the report yet, you can send out notifications for the same. And you can configure notifications for these options as well, whenever a comment is added or approved or rejected, when a report is reimbursed, etc. And when we talk about the approval types for expense reports, we have two different types. One is the hierarchical approval, and the other one is going to be a custom approval workflow. So hierarchical approval is basically where you don't have any conditions included. So there will be no conditions based on approval process, but the approval will be can be set up under the user section. So whenever a user is added into the application, using the submits to field, you can set up a hierarchical approval. So let's say I'm going to add a submitter user within the application. I'll be able to choose to whom they'll be submitting their expense reports to. If the user is going to be an approver, then I can use the approves and forwards to field to set to whom this person will be forwarding their reports to after approving a report. So that is something you can set up here. And under the settings, again, if you do not want a hierarchical approval, if you need approvals based on conditions or criteria, you can use the custom approval option to do that. So under custom approval, you can configure approval workflows based on the report total or the department name or any type of other criteria that you need. You can have custom criteria like projects or customers, or based on the username, or based on the department of the user or designation of the user. You can have different levels of approval. The major type of custom approval workflows will be triggered based on the report totals. Like, let's say if you have a report which is $0 to $500, you can have a single level approval. And if it goes above $500, you can have 2 or 3 different levels of approval. So you can configure different criteria that you need. And you can also have multiple criteria for your expense reports. And you can even play with the conditions that you need, if it's going to be an and or an or. So if you have a condition where either this or that, then you can use the or option to set up 2 different types of conditions for the same report. And whichever condition is true, the approval workflow will be triggered. So you can do that using this option. And just like it's not just one approval workflow that you can configure. You can configure as many levels of as many approval workflows you need, and you can even have priorities based on your approval workflows. So whenever the priorities based on the priority, approval workflows conditions will be tested. If the conditions are true, the approval workflow will be conducted. So that's about this. And you can also have report fields customized just like the expense fields. So you can have different fields available for your reports. So based on your reports, you can even create custom fields here. And apart from this, all the other modules that you see here, the categories, the customers or the projects, all these can be imported into the application, either using CSV or if you can integrate Zoho Expense and your accounting software, you can bring in the categories that way as well. So along with the categories that you bring in, you can also set out account codes. So for each category, you can have an account code being set up in here. And if needed, you can create subcategories as well for each category. So let's say under add travel expense, or let's say I need to make add travel expense as a subcategory to some other parent category. I can choose the parent category in here, and add travel will be considered as a as a subcategory. Let me just show you by a simple example. So I can add something like this, and I can make this as a subcategory for my automobile expense. And I can also add an account code, which will be showing up for my expenses. So that's about this. And the same way, you can also manage the paid through accounts which are added in Zoho Expense. So you will be able to add either a cash account or a bank account or another current liability account to Zoho Expense. And these paid through accounts can be used whenever a user creates an expense. Let's say a user creates a non-reimbursable expense, and it's something which is paid through the company's petty cash or any other bank account. They can choose through which account they made that payment. And similarly, whenever a report is reimbursed, as an admin, you will be able to use these paid through accounts to determine through which account the payment was made to the user. That's about this. And using the customers and projects, you can, like I said, you will be able to import them, and the same can be, you need to enable these fields so that the users can associate the customers or the projects with your expenses. Merchants will be automatically fetched in based on the receipts or based on your corporate card transactions. If you need, you can import your own list of merchants as well. Tags can also be created for your expenses. So let's say if you have different cost centers for your organization, where each expense needs to be associated with a cost center or a department, then you can use tags to do that. You can either tag your expenses individually, or you can tag it based on a particular expense report. And you can have different tags and options which are provided. So I can create a tag called department, and I can have different options being provided. So this can be chosen by the users whenever they create an expense as tags. Currencies can also be managed. Apart from the available default currencies, you can add your own list of currencies within the application, and you can choose what type of format needs to be followed for this currency, and the decimal places that you need, and the currency symbol as well. Taxes can be configured in here. So as I told you initially, for the Indian as well as the UK edition, taxes will be there. But for the other editions, you can create your own taxes. You can create taxes or tax groups. Tax groups allows you to choose multiple taxes to be allowed, to be applied on the same expense. And with the export templates, as we discussed earlier, you can export data in different formats. Email templates will allow you to send out custom email notifications. Report automation allows you to configure automatic report generation and submission for the users. If you feel that the users will not have a lot of time in terms of creating expense reports and submitting them for approval, you can use this option. With report automation, you can choose what frequency you would like to generate the reports, either weekly or monthly. And based on the frequency you choose, reports can be generated and then brought out to the users. So that can be done. With the workflow rules, basically allows you to configure custom notifications which can be triggered to the users. So you will be able to configure workflow rules based on reports or advanced payments or trips module. Whenever a report is, let me just create an example over here. So I'm just going to send out an email notification whenever a report is approved. I would like to have, and let's say the approver is going to be the project head. And whenever this is the case, I need an email alert which needs to be triggered to the users. So with the workflow rules, you get to construct a base, or you get to construct a skeleton over here with conditions and criteria. Based on the conditions, you can either do an email alert or a field update or a webhook where which can be used to notify another website, or you can use in-app notifications which can be viewed from the bell icon. So either one of these options can be done using the workflow rules. And most importantly, you can take backups of all the data from the application. So data backup can be taken from here as a CSV or an Excel file, and or you can also take a receipt backup as a zip file as well from the application. And that's about all the configurations that you can set up. Apart from this, we have integrations here. Right now we have integrations with all these list of applications that you see here. So you can integrate with any one of the accounting softwares that you see here, or you can integrate with our HR suite or CRM application. With Office 365 and G Suite, you can bring in your users directly. And with Uber integration, you can bring in the receipts directly from Uber for Business account over to Zoho Expense. And with Itlite integration, any travel bookings which are made through this platform can be brought into Zoho Expense as expenses under the user's account. With the Slack integration, you can receive instant notifications whenever a report is approved or rejected. So that's about all the integrations. And apart from this, the budgets option in Zoho Expense allows you to configure different types of budgets that you need. Budgets in Zoho Expense is mainly used as an analytical purpose. So you can create budgets based on your fiscal year. So you can choose whatever fiscal year it's going to be, and you can set up a budget period. And based on this, you will be able to set limits for every active category within your organization, based on the budget period again. So whenever you choose a budget period as half yearly, you can set up the limits over here. And at the end of the budget period, you will have an option to run a report on what was your budget amount for that period and what was the actual incurred amount during the budget period. So using the actuals again, you can create your next year's budget amounts. So likewise, you can set up different sets of budgets within the application. So that is about all the features which are included in Zoho Expense. I hope you were able to understand how the applications will be set up. I'll now give over the control to my next presenter, who will be Fayaz, who will be explaining you how the implementation process would work. Thank you. Fayaz, you can take over now.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So I think we can now discuss for. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. So I think we can break for 15 minutes now, and we can get back here in another 15 minutes. And then we can start on onboarding your users to Zoho Expense and how we go about the whole implementation process. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I hope everyone is back after the break. So if we can go ahead, can you please send a yes on chat so that we could go ahead with the next session? All right, so we have got a few yes here. So let's go ahead with the next session. So before that, we just had a poll on whether the demo was helpful or not, and we could see that a couple of you had responded that it could have been better. So can you just let me know which section would you like us to repeat on the demo so that I could try to cover this if possible on my session itself? All right, so you can keep sending me the questions or you can mention that on chat and we can take that up after the end of the implementation session. So I'll quickly share my screen with you. All right, I hope everybody is able to see my screen, right? All right. So Zoho Expense is one application that can be implemented according to the company's exact workflows that they have been following until now. So it is an application that helps streamline a company's entire expenses and expense reporting process. So it starts with, let's say a client has come up with Zoho Expense and they have decided to implement Zoho Expense in their organization. So it starts with identifying the scope of work, or it has to identify the exact scope of work or what the extent of the requirement of the client is. So we identify what is the client's expectations, we meet with different departments. So since it's an expense management process, there would be different teams involved in it. There would be a finance team who would handle the back office management. There would be a HR team who would be handling the user roles and the approval workflows. And then there would be the administration team who would be looking at the integration processes or on enforcing the policies in the organization. So we handle different meetings with different teams in the company and gather what requirements they have. So we have discussions on the integrations that they're expecting, what are the expected workflows of the client, and the type of customizations that they expect. So if their accounting system is on SAP, their HRMS is on SuccessFactors, and if they need an integration with any other business intelligence application, they mention that on the initial meetings itself so that we can then calculate the estimated time for the entire project to take place. So one of the key USPs of Zoho Expense is that it can readily accommodate the entire workflow that the company has been following until now. So right from saying that this is a particular limit for spending on a particular category, or from saying that this is your yearly limit on a particular category, everything can be configured inside Zoho Expense itself to make the expense management process much more swift, and even much more streamlined. And based on the scope of work, client has to provide us the required data in the particular format. So let's say if there is no HRMS integration that a client requires, they would not need an actual integration because there might not be much addition in their roles, or there might not be much attrition, but they would definitely have a HRMS system through which they can provide us an Excel sheet, or let's say a spreadsheet in which they mention the entire hierarchy, email address of the users, the roles to which should belong to, and the type of customizations that they need. So we provide them these spreadsheets or these formats, and the clients should share these formats to us. And apart from that, we also gather the business policy documents, the travel policies that the company has been following till now, and the policies related to expense that the employees are supposed to follow. So as I said, Zoho Expense can be implemented according to their workflows and according to their business policy document. For example, if a company says that for meals, your daily limit is 50 euros, then we will set that as a daily limit in the particular policy of the user. If a company has a rule saying that this particular user is not allowed for international travel, we will set that up in the approval workflow itself, where we say if an international trip is requested, it goes for an additional approval workflow or it gets rejected automatically. We also set up daily, monthly, or yearly limits on expense policies so that the users are warned when they create an expense itself. And then comes the implementation process. After the entire implementation is done, we have to train the users in the way which Zoho Expense was implemented. So Zoho Expense being one of the most flexible expense management applications, it can accommodate different workflows, and it can also be accommodated as per the company's current workflow. In that case, we need to train the employees on how the offline process or a process that was managed on a different application can now be done on Zoho Expense. For that, we have user training, we have user training videos, we have user education materials being circulated to the employees, and we can also host individual webinars for the users. So let's say if a 5,000 user company is going live with Zoho Expense, we can have maybe 100 submitter users as a first go, where we train them on how to create and submit expenses alone. And then we have the approver users gathered on a separate webinar where we manage them or we educate them on how to approve, reject, or modify the expense claims that are submitted. And then again, we have targeted user training videos. So not just user training videos that are available on YouTube or available as webinars on the website, we can have something that is targeted for every client. So let's say a large enterprise customer is going live with Zoho Expense. We can give a targeted webinar video on how it has been implemented in their own company itself. And again, Zoho Expense is one flexible application that can accommodate entire field customizations or different requirements that an enterprise might have. So in the entire finance suite of applications, Zoho Expense is our leading um, enterprise application. And coming to field customization, Zoho Expense allows additional fields to be created on expense level, on expense report level, and on the user level too. So let's say if an employee or if a company is requiring, let's say something like a cost center from the employees while they create an expense, we can have an additional drop-down field which displays all the cost centers of the company. We can also have something called a business unit or an auto-generate number on the expense creation form. So these expense report or expense fields allows the company to gather as much information they need from an employee when they create or submit an expense claim. Another additional or interesting feature that we have is the page layouts. So as you saw on the product demo, we have a lot of features that are on the early access stage till now. So one of them is the page layouts feature, where we can configure different fields based on different categories. So let's say for meals, if you need a particular category, but that field is not required for lodging category, we can enable it only for one such category also. So as I've mentioned over here, if location field is required only for lodging expenses, that field will be visible only for the particular category. So if the employee fills in a meal claim, then the location field will not be shown at all. So category-based field customization can be done. And even in the light of an integration, let's say like an SAP integration or like an Microsoft Dynamics integration where we have done, the integration part might need a particular information from the customer also. So let's say for every employee, if every employee is associated to a cost center or a business unit, and if that does not change, we can store that information in Zoho Expense under the user profile itself. So when the expense reports are exported to MS Dynamics or on SAP, this information is included on the export file itself. So it is customizable to a huge extent where entire requirement can be met inside the application itself. So let me quickly show you how the page layout feature looks like. So this is the categories section. And under the categories, we have, or let's say on expenses, we have this page layout section. So on the expense field customization, we have these fields where we can enable or disable any fields that should appear while creating an expense. Since this is on a global level, we have a page layout section where we can set it up based on each separate category also. Let's say for entertainment category, these fields should be enabled and these fields should be mandatory. So the attendees field should be mandatory for entertainment expenses. So every time an employee selects an entertainment expense, the attendee field becomes mandatory. But in case if they select a meal claim, then a particular other category becomes enabled or a different category becomes mandatory in the organization. I mean, a different field becomes mandatory while creating in that expense claim. So I can show you that while I create an expense claim. So let's say if I create meals, then the attendee field becomes visible over here. But in case if I create any other category, let's say like telephone expense, the field becomes invisible. So category-based field customization is one of the key additions or one of the key highlights that we can offer as a USP when you compare different expense reporting applications in the market. And Zoho Expense is very customizable when it comes to approval workflows and email workflows as well. So let's say if there is an approval workflow that is criteria based in an organization. If a report total is less than 5,000 euros, it would go to one level approval. But if it's greater than 5,000 euros, it has to go for two additional levels of approval. Such criteria can be defined inside the application, and it can be defined and it can be checked against whenever an employee submits an expense report claim. Even for trip requests, so let's say for domestic trip, if the approval level should only be one level, that can be configured like that. And if there should be 2 or 3 level approval workflows for international trips, we can configure it accordingly. And even with an HRMS integration, so let's say we go for a success factors integration or for Zoho people integration of that matter, we can set up the entire hierarchy according to the workflow that is configured in the HRMS system. So from the Zoho people integration, we bring in all the users, their email addresses, the roles that they belong to, and also set up what is the hierarchy that they should follow in the organization. So from Zoho people, we get to know who is the reporting manager for every user, and the reports and the trip request will be submitted to that particular user for approval. And even when it comes to email alerts or email approval or email workflows, we can set that up on a criteria basis. So let's say whenever a user from the sales department submits an expense report, the sales head or the department head should receive an expense copy of the expense report. We can set up certain criteria, let's say a criteria like when the department head is sales or when the department is sales, then an email alert should be triggered to these set of users. We can also set up what type of report they should receive, whether it should be a PDF report or whether it should be a CSV report. So there should be a different reports that can be sent to different users on a particular action that is completed. And even approval workflows based on policy violations. So let's say if a company has a policy that says that any expense reports that violates more than 2 policies has to be rejected, or the user should not be allowed to submit an expense that has, let's say, more than 2 policy violations. So we will configure a criteria that says if an expense report contains more than 2 policy violations, it should be automatically rejected. We can also configure an approval workflow that says that if the total policy violation count is more than 2, then it needs to go for a deviation approval workflow or an additional approval workflow for the expense report to get approved. So it is that customizable, or it can accommodate an entire approval matrix of a company. And coming to integrations, again, one more USP that Zoho Expense offers would be the extent to which it can be customized, or to the extent to which it can be integrated with different applications. So not just with Zoho applications like Zoho Books or Zoho People or Zoho CRM, Zoho Expense supports an integration with different third-party applications that are either readily available within the application or can be customized for each and every client. So when it comes to integration scope, or let's say the scope of integration, we can integrate with an accounting application, a HRMS integration, CRM integration, or even a project management integration. So let's say if a company uses Uber for Business or for Lyft, or let's say Ola Corporate in India, we can set up a direct integration with them for ride sharing, where every ride share that the employee completes on that particular app can create an expense parallelly in Zoho Expense. So in case if a company uses Lyft, every time an employee completes a ride on Lyft, that becomes a non-reimbursable expense under the employee's account in Zoho Expense. For CRM, we have a direct integration available with Zoho CRM, where the expenses and expense reports module can be shown inside Zoho CRM itself. And the sales team who are using CRM, they need not access a separate application to create expenses on Zoho Expense. They could create expenses from within Zoho CRM itself. And moreover, all the accounts and the contact persons that are already on CRM can be created inside Zoho Expense as customers and contact persons itself. So if a company which uses Zoho CRM wants to use Zoho Expense, they can generate how much expense is spent on a particular customer from the expenses by customer report in Zoho Expense. And with the HRMS integration, as I mentioned earlier, all the users, their approval workflows, their department, and the user hierarchy can be directly imported into the application. And every enterprise company would definitely have a requirement for single sign-on, either through Office 365 or through G Suite or through SAML. We can set up a direct integration with any of their third-party applications for single sign-on. So let's say even if they use Okta or ADFS, we can set up a direct integration with them. And let's say, so the direct integrations that we offer in Zoho Expense are with Zoho Books, QuickBooks Online, and with Xero. And for particular features or particular editions, like let's say the US edition or the Canada edition, we have a Zoho Expense integration with QuickBooks Enterprise or the QuickBooks Desktop version also. So we are also working on the QuickBooks Enterprise integration for other editions also. So that would also be launched in a short time. And that does not stop on the integrations with accounting platforms. We also have done several custom integrations with SAP, with Microsoft Dynamics, Microsoft Navision, and with NetSuite. So with this integration, we can directly export all their expense data, like the approved expense data from Zoho Expense into the SAP system itself. So from there, we can even get information back into Zoho Expense. So if a client is using SAP to reimburse the employees or record payments in SAP, we can use the integration itself to mark those expense reports as paid or as reimbursed in Zoho Expense. And even with Zoho, even on the HRMS system, as I said, we have a direct or a high level integration with Zoho People, where we fetch the user data from Zoho People automatically. We also have a custom integration that is readily available, or like let's say a custom integration that can be developed as per the client's requirement with SuccessFactors or even with Bamboo HR. So again, that can also go vice versa, where we say that every expense that is recorded by the employee, if it has to, if the employee has left the organization, then we can mark them as inactive in Zoho Expense. If the company has added a new employee onto SuccessFactors, we can onboard them as a new user in Zoho Expense also. So all these are some integrations that we do for every client, and it can also fetch in all these data. Like expense categories can be created in Zoho Expense from the chart of accounts in QuickBooks or in say Zoho Books or even on SAP. We can even export from Zoho Expense back into the ERP system. We can export the cash advances or the approved advance payments from the accounting system to Zoho Expense or even vice versa. And even projects that are added on SAP can be created in Zoho Expense as projects. And on the integration section, one part that I left out was the project management system. So we have a direct integration available with Zoho Projects now, where any project that is added on Zoho Projects can be created in Zoho Projects in Zoho Expense parallelly, and expenses recorded against that particular project. And even with Zoho Analytics, we have an integration coming up. So that is something that we have on the roadmap for Zoho Expense. So I've been talking about an ERP integration for Zoho Expense, but what is an ERP integration? So, or rather how we do the ERP integration. So an ERP integration can be done either via using the APIs of the ERP platform or via an SFTP file transfer. So we will either get the entire API documentation of the ERP from the client itself. So let's say if they use NetSuite. So NetSuite is something. So we ask the client to share the API documentation that they have for their NetSuite, or even for SAP for that matter, because such applications like SAP or NetSuite or Dynamics, these applications are something that is developed specifically for each client. It is highly customizable and is different for each client. So we need a separate API system or a separate for each client. So we expect the client to share all these information, and then we build a custom integration for them. And even for HRMS, we set up a direct connection with them. We hierarchy from Zoho from the HRMS system into Zoho Expense itself. And the ERP connector works in this way. So let's say you start with Zoho Expense side, and we get the export template of the ERP system. So every client would have an export template or an import template rather, which they would use to import data into the ERP system. So the idea is to match the export template of Expense to the import ERP system. So a Zoho Expense, we provide them a connector file that the employee or the client has to install on their computer. And that connector file will trigger or call the import API or the export API of Zoho Expense and convert the file, let's say from Zoho Expense format into the SAP format into the client's desktop or onto their server. Then we schedule it from their OS. So let's say we can schedule it as a job on their operating system, which will extract data from Zoho Expense on a particular time, let's say 12 a.m. every day, and directly import it into the ERP system of the client. So that could be SAP or that could be Dynamics, and we could post data into each SFTP that the client has opened. We could send one data package into their AP system. We could send one data package into their HRMS system, and we could send one data package into their finance module also. So that way, every information that is stored in Zoho Expense can be exported using the connector file. It can be converted into the file format of the client's ERP and even posted as a direct data inside the client's ERP system. So on that note, I think I can hand over to Uni for the what's new section in Zoho Expense. But just before that, let me just quickly give you an idea of what are the early access features that we have in Zoho Expense. So trips module is one of the early access features that we have in Zoho Expense earlier. So if any of you need a trip module access, you can just send us your email address on chat and we can enable it for you right away. And one recent addition that we have made on the policy section is the rules. So rules section allows you to create daily, monthly, or yearly limits on your expense categories. So let's say if you have a daily limit on lodging, or if a client has a daily limit of $500 on lodging categories, we can set up as a daily limit that would be pertaining to the particular policy, and we can define whether to warn the employees from submitting the expense claim or to block them from submitting the expense at all. We also have a yearly limit. So let's say if a company provides reimbursement for the telephone bills in the company. So we could say that $1,000 is your yearly limit to which you can create telephone claims. So that also can be set up as a warn or a block claim. And apart from this, we can also set up monthly limits. So let's say if something like meals or something like office supplies, if it needs to have a monthly limit of, let's say, $500 on a particular category, we can set that like this. Again, we can even define that as a warn or on a block level. So these are the settings or these are the policies or the rules that we configure while we onboard a client or when we implement the entire system to Zoho Expense. So whenever we onboard an entire client to Zoho Expense, we go through their business policy documents. We enforce the entire policies that they have inside the section in Zoho Expense itself. And we can also set up different expense types inside the application. So expense types is where we set up different group of categories of expenses together. So let's say if it is for lodging, then we can have different categories grouped together. We can have air travel. If it has different categories, we can group them all under different categories and under the same report or on the same expense type and generate reports based on that. And with the Zoho projects integration, we can bring in all the projects into Zoho Expense. And on the what's new section, I'll hand it over to Unni so that he can take you on a tour of what are the new features that we have enabled on Zoho Expense. So thank you for your time, and we can answer all the questions. And I'll now hand over to Unni for the remaining session.
Once again, hi everyone. So yeah, we've been getting many messages on enabling the feature. So we are doing it parallelly, and so we will have all the features enabled for you quite soon itself. Yeah, so I hope you can see my screen right now, and I'll be continuing with the what's new in Zoho Expense. So as you all know, like the travel industry has got or like has been hit so badly. So we've been redirecting our focus slightly to the business spend management since a long, and this has actually accelerated what we were planning to do. So we right now process or like we right now are doing a lot of developments on the business spend management side, including purchase requests, like petty cash management, purchase bills, vendor payments, budget and spend control, etc. So purchase request is nothing like, so for example, I'm going for a let's say I'm planning to subscribe for a software for my team, and I want to raise a request uh, or like it needs an approval from my manager whether I can go ahead and purchase that software uh, for my team. So those kind of requests can be done using our purchase request feature. And I mean, this is just one example, or like another use case which can be solved. Like for I'm going to take one of my client for a lunch or a dinner. So a client entertainment expense. So before I go for it, I need a approval. Like it's quite similar to like you're going for a business trip. Before that trip you need an approval. Similar to that, before you incur an expense, if you need any kind of an approval for that particular expense, that can be you can take that approval using our purchase request feature. Then petty cash management is another feature that we are working on. Like if you have let's say you are into retail industry and you have like 100 stores across the globe. So the petty cash in each store need to be managed. So that kind of a managed petty cash management system is also getting built within Zoho Expense. Then purchase bills and vendor payments. So that is also in our roadmap, and it will be. I mean, so basically, like the purchase bills of the software which you purchased, and the payments to be made for in addition for that particular software can also be done from within Zoho Expense. Then budgeting and spend control. So I guess like during the presentation or during the previous session, I mean, Ramesh had given you an overview on how we can configure the budgets in the application. So that we will be enhancing a little bit more, and we will make it in a way that you can make or set up budgets for a department. You can set up alerts based on that, etc. On addition to that, so advanced analytics. So as you all know, Zoho Analytics, which is our BI tool, and I saw a couple of questions related to the integration with BI tool. So we are working on it, and hopefully, I mean, it's currently in the testing phase, and hopefully we would be able to give you early access by the end of this month. Or I'm sorry, by the end of May, and it can be taken live maybe within 2 months. So you can expect an early access before the end of May. Then a couple of integrations that we are working on is like VAT reclaim and travel. So, or what is VAT reclaim? For example, I travel to Europe and I pay for a lot of expenses for which I pay the taxes to the Europe. Like let's say I travel to Switzerland and I paid taxes in Switzerland. I will be able to reclaim the taxes I paid from the Switzerland government. But since I've paid for my meals or like I paid for my, let's say, some business purchase or something like that, I do not want to go behind that amount, like say maybe 100 euros, and because it's going to be a tedious process. So for that, there are certain players who work for doing the VAT reclaim, and we are integrating with them. So as a company, you can, or like the client can talk to them and get the reclaim for all the expenses that they pay in foreign countries and get a reclaim of it. So when you take it as a company, it will not be 100 euros. Like if 100 employees travel like that, it will be 10,000 euros. So that is how that is how this VAT reclaim integrations will help, and it is actually uh, it is going to be more helpful when it is not just travel expenses, it is also going to be purchase expenses, your business purchases happening in foreign countries and everything. And coming to travel integrations, I know that it is not much a hot topic right now considering to the situation, but yeah, so travel integrations, what we are doing is like we are integrating with travel booking companies, like the applications which can book flight tickets or make hotel reservations and all. And when you make a booking in those travel websites, the ticket will get the expense will get automatically created in your Zoho expense account. And finally, activity based pricing. So this is something which would be new in the entire Zoho. So that is, if you're going, so let's say, so all our competitors of Zoho expense has been in the activity based pricing model since a very long time. And so we also have provided early access to activity based pricing for a couple of customers. So what is activity based pricing? So let's say you have your company has like around 2000 employees, and maybe only 300 of those employees are regularly using the application, or like maybe they are the only ones who incur a lot of expenses for business purchases or business lunches or maybe travel, etc. So why should you pay for the entire 2000? You should only pay for the 300. So that is what we will be achieving using activity based pricing. That is, only the employees who records an expense in a particular month will be considered as an active user. I'm not sure if I'm audible clearly. Please let us know if you're facing any issues with my audio. How is it now? Okay. So please feel free to ask if you have any questions, and because I guess for some people the audio is not working properly. One thing is, like, you can just refresh the screen and it might get better. Yeah. So coming back to the activity-based pricing. So if you come across any customers who says that, okay, your competitors that like Expensify or Concur, they charge only for the users who are using the application in a particular month, please reach out to us. We can enable activity-based pricing for that particular customer. And so activity-based pricing will be higher than what is the list pricing or what is the all user pricing, because when we do the all user pricing, it is calculated in a way that we already know that only 40 or 30% of a company is going to be using or is going to be incurring expenses on a monthly basis. And considering that only, we have designed the all user pricing, and that is how like the application is priced this low. So activity based pricing would be a bit higher than what you would be or what the customer would be paying on the all user pricing model. Now, last year, this time in Austin, I had announced the launch of Zoho Expense 2.0 mobile applications for the iOS and Android. So this year, we are going to be launching, we are going to launch the 2.0 version for the web application as well. So I hope everyone is using the 2.0 mobile applications right now. It is, a brand new UI with a very intuitive interface and everything. So you can expect the same to be happening for the web application. So it's been 5 years since Zoho Expense has been launched, and we had received a lot of feedbacks on how usability can be improved, or like what are the things which you wanted to be shown more on the application, like you want to list the applications in a category based format or something like that. So all those requirements are addressed in the 2.0, and it will be launched soon. Maybe in a couple of months we would be able to provide early access in by June, I hope. So just keep it within yourself. So it's something that the one of the most exciting things that is going to happen with Zoho Expense in the near future. So that's all about the what's new section. And now coming to the opportunity for partners, like how can we make money? So Zoho Expense is an application which serves almost all the industries in business, that is retail, technology, hospitality, or pharmaceutical, services industry, food and beverage. So we have customers from almost all the industries. So it is not any industry specific things. And maybe if I say like, okay, if I talk about the verticals or like how it has to be customized, it may change between the industries, but not more than in 5 ways. So it is very easily implementable, and there are only maybe 4 or 5 ways in which you can implement Zoho Expense, and that will cover almost 100% all the industries in the application. So you don't have to be, I mean, you don't need to be uh, going in so much breadth. So it is just like five five types of industry, or like 5 types of implementations that are required to serve all the industries across the business. And for a very simple implementation, like let's say like less than 100 employee company, you will not take more than 7 days. So that is something. So if you have any customer implementations going on, or like if you have any customer implementations that is coming up, please just let us know. We will help you. We will help you, or like we will even give you a step-by-step process on how the implementation can be done for that customer. And that, because that can, we can take that opportunity to train you on implementation, and make you an expert in how you can onboard a customer onto Zoho Expense. It would be very simple, and it can be done within, like, I mean, less than a week's time. So it's a, as you know, it is a user based model. So more and more, so as your customer grows, there will be more and more employees, and the when the employees increases, your revenue also will increase. So it's that kind of a method, and it's not like a one time payment kind of thing. So another thing is like regarding the competitors. So these are the competitors of Zoho Expense: SapConquer, Expensify, and Coupa. We have seen a lot of customers moving from these players, I mean SapConquer and Expensify and Coupa, into Zoho Expense. And these players have been in the market since, let's say SapConquer has been in the market since 15 years, Expensify maybe around 10 years, and Coupa, I don't know, but yeah, close to 12 to 13 years. So as you can see, like we have got some information from Ola regarding the number of employees they have and the revenue that they generate. So for 4,900 employees in SapConquer, that is almost half of Zoho. So that is the depth, or that is how much the expense domain can grow in a company like Sun. I mean, as a company. So the same kind of growth you can expect with Zoho Expense, and that is the, and so you can see like these competitors, they charge their products so high. You can just go to the websites and search for these competitors pricing, like Expensify pricing and Coupa pricing and all. I mean, SapConquer hasn't publicized their pricing, but you will get the information and how, like how we have priced our applications. So there are people who are ready to move from these players into Zoho. And one of the biggest advantages is the Zoho ecosystem. They can get everything. So once you move one of their, that is like their expense management, into Zoho Expense, they would be interested to know more about the other applications, and they can be easily moved on to the entire Zoho suite. And to support that, another interesting factor is they may not be using all the Zoho applications initially. For that, we support out of the box integrations with various platforms. That is, when I say various platforms, like maybe QuickBooks, maybe Office 365, or say I think this is a better page to show. So SAP Concur, I mean, sorry, SAP, Oracle, Sage, or Xero, or QuickBooks. So let them run their accounts or ERP on any software, and HRMS on any software. Zoho Expense integrates with those platforms to do the data communication seamless. And once they are in Zoho, they will have it. They will get a taste of Zoho, and they will be willing to move to other applications of Zoho. So that strategy will definitely help you out, and in bringing in more customers to Zoho Expense as well as other Zoho products. So just going back a couple of slides. So I wanted to just give an idea about the other integrations in place. Like we have integration with Uber for Business, Lyft in US, Slack, Office 365. So MasterCard, Visa, and American Express integration is something that I mean, that is very interesting. Not many applications have that. And also we have integrated with Forte for the US and Canada market for doing online reimbursements, and ICICI Bank for doing reimbursements in India. We also talk with Xero and QuickBooks. Now, and you have to look at the online application ratings, like the GetApp, the G2 Crowd, and Captera, you will see like how many customers have given positive feedbacks on their movement from Expensify into Zoho Expense. So that's all for today. So I guess like we will take up more questions now, and if you want me to go deeper into any section, please just put it on the chat, and I'll be happy to explain it further. Anil, yeah. So Anil have asked about custom domain. Yes, we can enable custom domain for you. You can so you can just drop an email to support@zohoexpense.com, and we will we will give you the steps to do custom domain. And supporting documents, sure. I mean, for expense, I can definitely arrange it, and for books and inventory, I'll have the respective team take it up. So any other questions, guys? We can, Bernard, we can send you competitor comparison sheets. Like we have comparison sheets on Zoho Expense versus Expensify, Zoho Expense versus Concur, etc. So I can definitely send you those. So that would help you in pitching Zoho Expense to your clients. Sure, sure. Please just drop us an email. You can just send us an email. Send me an email to unni@zohocorp.com, and we will send you the competitor comparison sheets. Um, so, Mary, when you say overview of the questions after, do you want to run through the questions once again? I mean, all the questions that were asked during the session. So I think we had received a question saying whether we can, I mean, whether you recommend Zoho Expense as a solution competing to Concur. I mean, without the combination of Zoho ecosystem. Yes, definitely yes. So as I said here, like Zoho Expense can be a standalone product and talk to SAP, Oracle, Sage, or their HRMS system or any ERP that the customer is using. So you can give them a taste of Zoho. You can give the client a taste of Zoho using Zoho Expense, and after that, let them use Zoho Expense for a period of time with their existing ERP or HRMS and all. Then you can slowly move them into other applications in the Zoho ecosystem. And Zoho Expense, or like expense management, being a very simpler process than HRMS or CRM, they will be more willing to explore other applications on expense management. Okay. So let me see if I can project it quickly. Please give me 2 minutes time. Okay, so is there a possibility of syncing? So I hope everyone can see the screen. So is there a possibility of syncing users under Zoho Mail or Workplace? So the answer is direct integration with Zoho Mail or Workplace is not possible, but Zoho Directory will help you here. You can use Zoho Directory and sync the users to Zoho Mail, Workplace, and Expense together. So restriction in policies for whole year or monthly. So we have daily limit, monthly limit, and yearly limit. So you can set up the limits as per your requirement. So mileage bans by the distance that traveled. So in UK and Canada, we have seen requirement like, okay, after 10,000 miles, after a vehicle travels 10,000 miles, the mileage rate uh, differs, or like it goes down. So we have that feature, but it is default, by default it is enabled only in the US and Canada edition. UK and Canada edition. So if anyone wants the mileage ban feature, please just drop an email to support@zohoexpense.com, and we could enable that for you. So it is available in the global edition too. So currently we do not track the location for mileage expenses. So we don't have immediate plans for it. So one of the biggest reasons is, I mean, it has to be done either through Google Maps or something like that, geocoding or geolocation. So that is quite expensive. So that is one of the reasons we don't do that. Zoho Analytics and Zoho Expense integration will be rolled out in 2 months, and I hope like we would be able to provide you early access before the end of May. So custom fields in Zoho Expense and Zoho Books are different. It is not the same. If you want a field to be shared between the applications, then you should be using tags. That is reporting tags. So per diem tab on expense, like you're missing, you might be missing because you haven't configured the per diem. So please go to admin policies, the per diem tab on the top, and you will be able to set up a per diem rate, and it can be, and then it would be shown for you. You can add debit cards as well as credit cards in Zoho Expense. And I mean, you can add even personal cards. So when you go to the window cards, like you will have an option add card, whether it is personal or corporate. If it is a personal card, you can choose personal. If it's a corporate credit card, you can choose that. So hope many of you are aware of the issues in the Europe UK market, the PSD2. So we also have a direct integration with MasterCard, Visa, and American Express. So if it is a corporate credit card, we can provide direct integration with your bank's credit card. So please just drop an email to support@zohoexpense.com, and we will be helping you with the same. Zoho people and Zoho Expense talks really well. Like that is the employee master from Zoho Expense. Zoho people will be synced into Zoho Expense, the reporting hierarchy as well as the departments. So trips has to be enabled from our end. Please just send us an email and we will enable it for you. So corporate card payments cannot be done from Zoho Expense. Only the corporate card reconciliation can be done from Zoho Expense. So you connect your corporate card with Zoho Expense and you take a photo of the receipt. The, 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 the receipt expense and the corporate card transaction will get matched automatically. Post which you can go, you can associate with an expense report and submit it for approval. Yes, so trip is not a mandatory thing. You can submit an expense report without a trip. So we have a so train travel. It can be added as a category. I mean, expense category. Also, it is present within the travel request or trip request form. If you go to others section, you will find train and buses. Zoho Expense is available in, I think, 9 languages. So if you're using the global edition, please check, go to admin section, settings, organization profile. There you will find uh, there you will find the language section. Yeah, so trips, as I said, please contact us and we can enable it for you. So yeah, if you're using credit cards in Zoho Books and Zoho Expense, I would recommend you to use it only in Zoho Books. And when you're recording an expense from Zoho Expense, choose the paid through as the card in Zoho Books. But if your card in Zoho Books is not working, in that case, you can use or you can connect the cards in Zoho Expense. Yes, only after the approval. So once the corporate credit card feed has to be reconciled in Zoho Expense and then approved, and post the approval, it will be present in Zoho Books. Yeah, so due to PSD2, there are a lot of issues with connecting the cards, but you can try out the direct feed integration, which we have with MasterCard, Visa, and Amex, and that there is a high chance that it would be working out. And this feature is only for Zoho Expense. So Thai language, that is in our plans, we will be working on it. Sure, sure. So for direct feed integration, I would recommend you to contact support and we will help you with the right steps. So advance payment that you record in Zoho Expense will actually create a transaction to employee advance account. So employee advance is an asset account in Zoho Books. So for example, you paid from a bank account or a petty cash account in Zoho Books to the employee. So the two or the credit will happen in the employee advance asset account and the debit will happen in the paid through account of your advance payment. So it will not be coming up as an expense, but it will be coming up as a transaction. Yeah, in fact, it is a money out. So all these like the employee advance, the per diem expenses, the other reimbursable expenses, everything can be put under one expense report and it will do the cancellation and the final amount to be reimbursed to the employee will be shown in the application. Yes, the categories in Zoho Expense and Zoho Books will be in sync, but please note like only expense type and other expense type categories will be in sync between Zoho Expense and Zoho Books. So page layout or other features that you want, please just send us your email address and we will enable it for you. How will I restrict co-attendees to make same expense entry to avoid multiple reimbursement for an expense? So This is something that we currently don't have, but I hope like we will be doing this feature before the end of this year. And Harish, I'll definitely let you know. So this feature request, I mean, we have received this feature request multiple times from the Indian market, so we will definitely take this up. So geolocation capture is something that is not in immediate plans. I'll definitely let you know if we take it up. So custom domain is possible. Anyone can contact us, and we will help you with the steps for it. So supporting document for expense, like implementation document, we are yet to prepare it, but we will prepare it and share it with you. So as I said, Concur, it's a good solution to compare with Concur, and you don't need the support of the Zoho ecosystem. Zoho Expense will act as a standalone and talk to whichever ERP or the HRMS application that the customer is using, and it will work well with the combination. Sure, please just drop us an email and we will send you the competition comparisons. Okay, so I guess that's all. Like, let me see if I have any new questions. Okay. I think that's all, guys. So please just drop us an email to support@zohoexpense.com, or you have our email addresses. So please just drop us an email if you have any questions.